All right, welcome to the subject to sale addendum that we're going to be reviewing today. So the subject to sale addendum obviously is used if the property of your buyers is subject to sale, right? To fulfill the purchase agreement, they need to sell their home prior. Then the subject to sale addendum is what's used. So you're going to list the MLS number at the top. You're going to have the property address in there, and then you're going to have the purchase agreement is subject to sale, the buyer's property located, and whatever the address is for the home that they're selling. And then it states that if the subject to sale contingency is not removed on or before, and then a date, so the amount of time that the buyer is asking the sellers to grant them in order to sell their home. What's normal? 30 days, 60 days. So I would just tell you, like, kind of be thinking about the market, right? I have a hard time thinking maybe a property will sell in a day or two if the average days on market is 90, right? So just kind of be mindful. If it's not sold, so if the property is not sold by whatever date that you put on line 6, then the agreement will be null and void and all earnest monies will be returned. So until removal, the seller may continue to market their property to obtain an acceptable offer. So it isn't necessarily a bad thing that you work with a subject to sale offer, because we do still get to market the property as active. However, you should really be letting people know that there is a subject to sale offer on the home when they view it, just so that they'll understand, their clients will understand the process. The sellers may demand removal at any time by serving written notice to the buyers or buyer's agent using the notice to buyer removal of subject to sale contingency. So the condition of the property, so it states, when are you going to do the inspection? Are you going to agree that the inspection will begin upon removal of the subject to sale addendum and then within blank amount of days of that time? Or are you going to still have it be upon final acceptance of the purchase agreement that the inspection will be completed on or before a certain date or length of days? So what's the difference? So the difference would be this. Does your buyer, so if you're representing the buyer side, does your buyer want to go ahead and pay for an inspection up front before they know if their home is sold? Or do they simply want to wait until the home is under contract, their current home is under contract, and then the removal has happened? So most of the time, I would say it's probably most common that the parties will want to wait until that removal happens and then enter into the inspection period. Now, it's kind of a risk, right, for both parties, because they could go 30 days and then remove the subject to sale and then go through the inspection and find out the home doesn't work. So again, it just takes some conversations around what would be best for the client to manage that situation. Line 19 says, if the buyer serves notice to the seller using the notice to seller removal of subject to sale contingency, A or B, the buyer may provide the sellers with written documentation that they have received that they've received the necessary funding so that they can purchase the property without selling their home, or they've received an acceptable offer on their home and that they're moving forward with that. So what I encourage you to put into practice is that when you're meeting with a buyer and they tell you that they need to sell their home in order to purchase their next home, I would highly suggest that you ask them, do I need to, is there a way? Can I qualify for 2 mortgages in the event that that situation were to arise, okay? Because nothing's worse than a buyer entering into this and 2 days later, right, the seller gets a different offer and serves them notice, and then they kind of hustle to see if there's any chance they could make it work. So I just encourage you to ask your buyer clients, hey, if it's even a possibility, my recommendation is to talk to your lender and have that in our pocket, in our toolkit, in case we would need it. Not that we want to use it or not that we'll approach it with that method, but just in the event that we need it, that we know if we have that option or not. So it talks about the closing shall occur on a date agreeable to both the buyer and seller, not to exceed blank calendar days from notice. I mean, for example, like not to exceed 45 days from notice. If the seller serves notice to the buyer using the notice to the buyer removal of the subject to sale contingency. Prior to the removal of the subject to sale contingency, the buyer shall have blank hours, not less than 24, including weekends and holidays, to either provide the documentation that they can move forward with their financing without selling their home, or that they have an offer in place. So what does this mean? This means it can't be less than 24 hours. Most common, I usually ask for like 48. Again, it's negotiable, right? So, but maybe, 48 hours. But again, I want my clients to know if they have that option to do something without selling their home ahead of time, so that we're not in distress during this 24 or 48 hour time period. All right, both parties sign that at the bottom, and that is the subject to sale addendum.